Welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're exploring Roma communities in Slovakia. Going beyond the headlines and getting a deeper understanding. We'll be looking at a YouTube video by Josie from the channel Josie Lifts Things.
Ah, yeah, Josie lifts things.
Her video is called 50 Hours in Europe's Most Dangerous Gypsy Slum. Kind of grabs your attention, doesn't it?
Yeah, that title is pretty loaded, isn't it? It kind of plays into those preconceived notions people often have about Roma settlements.
Right, like dangerous slums. I mean, it's what I thought of too when I saw it. But what we're going to do in this deep dive is see how those perceptions, those initial impressions stack up against reality.
Yeah, peeling back those layers, going deeper.
Exactly. One thing that really jumped out at me right off the bat watching Josie's video was the resilience of the Roma people. I mean, we're talking about centuries of discrimination, being pushed to the margins, yet their culture, their spirit, it's like vibrant, alive.
It really is. And that resilience, that strength, it's deeply rooted in their history. They can trace their origins all the way back to northern India.
Wow, really?
Yeah. And their migration to Europe, it started around the 11th century, most likely because of conflicts and invasions back in their homeland.
It makes you think, doesn't it? Like how long they've been a part of Europe, yet still treated as outsiders, facing so much prejudice, exclusion.
Yeah, it's a long history of hardship, and it helps us understand the challenges so many Roma communities still face today.
Yeah, it's like this heavy weight from the past. Like even in Slovakia, there's a specific law. And on the surface, it seems, neutral, but it really hits the Roma people hard when it comes to housing.
Are you talking about Act No 50, the one from 1976, about territorial planning and building code?
That's the one. It basically, it allows the government to just demolish homes they consider unfit. Yeah. But get this, they don't have to provide proper alternative housing.
Oh, yeah. I know that one. On paper, it sounds, I guess, reasonable. Unfit housing can be dangerous. But how it's actually used, it's led to so many Roma families being displaced, pushed into even worse living situations.
It's heartbreaking. And Josie actually goes to one of these places in her video.
Oh, which one?
Linik 9.
Linik 9, yeah.
It's often called Europe's largest gypsy slum. I mean, the images are stark. Crumbling buildings, overcrowding, like basic services are limited.
Yeah.
But you know what? Josie finds something else there too.
What's that?
This strong sense of community and people who are just determined to make the best out of a tough situation.
It's amazing, right? That human spirit. But we have to remember, Linik 9, it's just one place. It doesn't represent the whole picture of Roma communities. It's a powerful example, for sure, of the struggles some face. But there's so much diversity within the Roma population.
That's such a good point. It's like we can't just paint everyone with the same brush. Speaking of different experiences, Josie visits another settlement, smaller, kind of hidden away, Rashava.
Oh, Rishava. Yeah, I've heard of that one.
The conditions there, they're even more, dire. Families living without running water, without proper sanitation. It's hard to imagine, how people, especially children, can even, survive in those circumstances.
It's a struggle, for sure. Rishava really brings to light the whole issue of social exclusion. It's isolated geographically and socially. And that just leads to neglect, lack of resources, the cycle of poverty. It just becomes so hard to break.
And, goes back to what you were saying earlier about not letting one place define a whole group of people. Because amidst all these challenges, there are examples of Roma communities that are, thriving.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Josie even visits a village where they've been successfully integrated into a mixed community. And it's like night and day compared to Linik 9 or Rishava.
Wow. That's amazing. Integrated village. That's a hopeful sign.
It really is. It shows what's possible when, intentional efforts are made to address those deep-rooted inequalities.
Yeah, that's key. Intentional action.
So what was it about this village that made it different? Well, Josie points out a few key factors. One that really stood out to me was the creation of these social enterprises. But they're not just any businesses. They specifically target Roma workers, providing jobs, opportunities.
Ah, I see. So it's about empowering them economically, not just handouts.
Exactly. It's about giving them the means to lift themselves up. And it's not just about the jobs themselves, but also the skills they learn. Like Josie mentions a carpentry workshop.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic. Carpentry.
Yeah. Not only does it provide work, but it also teaches valuable skills, skills that can be passed down through generations. It's like breaking that cycle of poverty, but in a sustainable way.
Yeah, it's investing in the future.
It wasn't just about jobs either. Josie talked about how the village really focused on education for the Roma children. Understanding that education, it's a pathway to a brighter future.
It's an investment in their potential.
Exactly.
Mm.
But it wasn't just about getting them into a classroom. It was about creating this supportive environment where they could actually succeed. They had this mentoring program, pairing Roma students with non-Roma mentors, providing academic and social support.
Oh, that's smart. That's really smart. It helps bridge those cultural differences.
Right. And creates this sense of belonging, like you're not alone. It seems like they really took this like holistic approach, addressing both the social and economic factors that contribute to marginalization.
It makes sense, right? When you think about it, you can't just address one aspect and expect everything to change.
Exactly. It's about tackling it from all angles. And, Josie's video really made it clear that discrimination, it plays a huge role in perpetuating that cycle of poverty and social exclusion.
Ah, yes. Discrimination. It's like this an invisible barrier.
It's insidious, isn't it?
It really is because, it often manifests in these subtle ways, hidden beneath the surface. It's not always about overt acts of racism. It's the biases, the lowered expectations that just chip away at a person's dignity, their worth.
There's this story Josie tells about a young Roma man named Maros. He was studying to be a teacher's assistant, obviously bright, motivated.
Sounds promising.
But he was already bracing himself for the challenges he'd face finding a job simply because of his ethnicity.
Oh, that's just so unfair.
It is. It's like this self-fulfilling prophecy. When you're constantly told, either directly or indirectly, that you're not good enough, you start to believe it, limit your own dreams.
It's like a wall, preventing people from reaching their full potential. We got to break down that wall.
We do. We absolutely do. It's about creating a society where everyone feels valued, respected, regardless of their background, where opportunity is based on merit, not prejudice. And speaking of challenging those prejudices, one thing that struck me in Josie's video was this stark contrast.
Oh, what was that?
Between her initial apprehension, that fear going into these communities.
Remember that robbery?
Right. And then the warmth, the hospitality she actually experienced.
It's like that shattered her expectations, huh?
It did. It showed me how easily our perceptions can be influenced by, fear. By what we hear, not what we actually experience.
It's amazing how often our perceptions of a place or even people are shaped by what we see on TV or read in the news, media in general.
Totally. And sadly, with Roma communities, those portrayals are so often, full of stereotypes. It's like all doom and gloom.
Right. It's like they're stuck on repeat, just showing the same images over and over. Poverty, crime. Like, remember how Josie's video was even titled?
Oh, yeah. Europe's most dangerous gypsy slum.
Exactly. Like right off the bat, you're expecting the worst.
And that kind of framing, it just reinforces all those prejudices, doesn't it? Creates this atmosphere of fear and distrust. It's like it dehumanizes the Roma people.
It does. And when you dehumanize a group, it becomes easier to justify treating them poorly, to marginalize them.
And that's the danger, right?
Yeah.
It's so easy to just accept those media portrayals as the whole truth. But what struck me was how different Josie's actual experience was.
Oh, yeah. How so?
She talks about how surprised she was by the friendliness, the hospitality, especially after that initial robbery she went through.
Right. That first encounter, definitely not a good one. But it's a good point you're making. It shows how easy it is to, take one experience, even a bad one, and apply it to a whole group.
Exactly. And that's where I think critical thinking is so important. Being able to separate individual actions from the characteristics of a whole community.
Couldn't agree more. You can't judge a whole book by its cover, right? But are you saying that you think the media is solely to blame for these negative perceptions?
Well, I don't think it's that simple. I mean, sure, the media plays a part, but it's also reflecting these deeper societal biases, stuff that's been around for centuries,
Yeah, absolutely. It's a mix of things, historical, social, political, all rolled into one.
The tangled web.
For sure. And those factors, those perceptions, they can have a real impact on people's lives.
Yeah, like we talked about before with housing and jobs, that discrimination. Do you think that's connected?
Oh, absolutely. When people are constantly shown that Roma are criminals or a burden to society, it's easier to deny them equal opportunity.
It's messed up, isn't it?
It really is. And it creates this vicious cycle, Discrimination leads to poverty, exclusion, and then that just reinforces the negative stereotypes.
Like they can't win. But Josie's video did offer some hope. Like, she spoke with this young Roma woman, Anna, and she was the first Roma woman elected to Slovak parliament.
Wow, that's amazing.
I know, right? Breaking barriers. Her story's so inspiring. It shows that change is possible and that Roma people are, raising their voices, being heard in those spaces where decisions are made.
Exactly. They're claiming their rightful place at the table. And it's not just in politics. Josie highlights the work of several Roma-led organizations pushing for social change.
It's like taking back control, shaping their own destiny.
Yeah.
But, for me, that integrated village, that was like the most concrete example of how positive change can happen.
It's a powerful example for sure. They really put in the effort to make it work, creating those social enterprises, remember?
Yeah, like they understood that economic empowerment, that was key to breaking that cycle.
Exactly. Giving people the means to support themselves, their families. And it's not just about handing out jobs. It's about creating an environment where Roma people can succeed.
And that was the difference, wasn't it? They also focused on education, building up that sense of community.
And they had the mayor on board too, right? Josie mentioned how dedicated she was to making sure all the residents, everyone, felt like they belonged.
That's so important, right? Having those in positions of power, actually championing inclusivity, it sends a message. It sets the tone. But it makes me think about places like Rashava, that isolation. It felt like the challenges there were on a whole different level.
Oh, definitely. Rashava is a harsh reminder that progress, well, it doesn't always reach everyone equally. Those isolated communities, it's harder to address those deep-seated issues.
It's like they're invisible,
Yeah.
forgotten. So how do we break through that? Start creating meaningful change in places like Rashava?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And one we'll try to tackle in the final part of our deep dive.
I got to say, Rashava, it really stayed with me. It was like stepping into a different world, like basic things that most of us just take for granted. Clean water, a safe place to live. It's a constant struggle there.
Yeah. And that's the reality for so many communities, not just Roma. All over the world, people face these challenges. Isolated, lacking access to basic necessities. It's tough.
It really is. It's like this cycle of poverty and neglect, it just keeps going. And I remember in the video, they talked about how a lack of political representation, even just media coverage, it all plays a part.
You're right. Visibility is huge. When communities are hidden, their needs are ignored. It's like they don't exist. And that's where advocacy comes in, raising awareness, putting pressure on those in power to do something.
But it can't just be about outsiders coming in with solutions, right?
Exactly. It has to come from within. The communities themselves, they know what they need. We can support, provide resources, but ultimately they need to lead the way.
I like that.
Mhm.
Empowering them to create their own solutions.
Exactly. And Josie spoke to someone in Rashava who said, Roma people need to unite, advocate for their rights, find their voice, demand the changes they need.
It's like taking ownership. And there are organizations out there doing that work, right?
Yeah, like the European Roma Rights Center. They're doing some amazing work, empowering communities, fighting discrimination, pushing for change at all levels, national, international.
So what kind of changes are we talking about? What can governments actually do to make a difference?
Well, for starters, education. Equal access to quality education is crucial. And it starts early with those early childhood programs, making sure Roma kids aren't discriminated against in schools.
It's about more than just, like, getting them in the door. It's about creating a welcoming space. Remember that mentoring program in the integrated village?
Oh, yeah. That was great. Something like that can make a real difference.
It makes you feel seen, supported.
Exactly. And along with education, we got to address the economic gap. Policies that create jobs, provide training, support for Roma entrepreneurs, give them the means to build a better life.
It's like giving them the tools, not just a handout.
Right.
Empowering them.
But it's not just about governments. It's about all of us. We can all make a difference.
Yeah, like what can we do individually?
Well, it starts with ourselves. Checking our own biases, being aware of how prejudice and discrimination show up in our lives.
Being better allies.
Exactly. And speaking up when we see injustice, supporting those organizations working to make a difference.
Educating ourselves, too.
Yes. Learning about Roma history, culture, the challenges. The more we understand, the more we can empathize.
Well, I know I learned a lot from this deep dive. Josie's video, it really opened my eyes.
Me too. It's been a real journey, hasn't it? Exploring the complexities of the Roma experience, the good, the bad.
And, it's clear that there's no easy fix. But there are things we can do, both big and small, to make a difference. for Roma communities and for all marginalized groups.
I think that's a great takeaway. So as we wrap things up here, I'd encourage everyone listening, take a moment to think about what resonated with you, what surprised you, what made you think differently, and most importantly, what action will you take, even a small one, to make the world a more inclusive, compassionate place?
It's a question worth asking ourselves. And on that note, thanks for joining us with this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep challenging those assumptions.